Before it was ever called haunted, Hillview Manor served as a place for those who had nowhere else to go. People didn't arrive here expecting recovery. They arrived expecting an ending. For decades, lives passed slowly through these halls, not measured in milestones, but in routine. Meals, medications, long nights, final breaths were taken behind closed doors that were reopened almost immediately for someone new. There was no single tragedy here, no fire, no massacre, no moment in history could point to say this is when everything went wrong. Instead, Hillview became something else entirely. A place shaped by accumulation, by isolation, by thousands of quiet goodbyes that were never witnessed. And when a building bears that much silence for that long, the silence doesn't always stay silent. I'm Van Holsting, and you're listening to Life, the Universe, and Everything in Between. Hillview Manor opened its doors in 1926 as the Lawrence County Almshouse. Its purpose was simple and grim. It existed to house the poor, the elderly, the chronically ill, and those without family or resources. For many residents, this was not a temporary stay. It was the last place they would ever live. Life inside Hillview was institutional. Residents shared rooms, and privacy was scarce. Days were governed by routine rather than comfort. Medical care focused on maintenance, not recovery. Death was common, quiet, and expected. Hillview Manor closed its doors in 2004. What it left behind wasn't a single tragedy, but decades of endings layered one on top of another. And when a place is shaped by that much loss for that long, some believe it doesn't simply forget. Which brings us back to my first visit, back in 2015. By then, Hillview Manor had already earned its reputation. Stories circulated online. Famous investigators had come and gone. The building was known. But knowing a place by reputation is very different from standing inside it. From the outside, Hillview looked quiet, still, almost passive. But the moment I stepped through the doors, that changed. There was a weight to the air. Not fear, not panic. Just the unmistakable sense that you weren't alone. The halls felt longer than they should have. Sounds carried strangely. Footsteps echoed where no one else was walking. Every room felt like it had been paused mid-moment, as if something had just stepped away. One of the first areas I visited was the basement. There was a room down there that still housed personal belongings, suitcases, old televisions, paperwork, clothing, things that no one came back to collect, either because they were unwanted or because there was no one left who cared. It was noticeably cooler down there. The boiler had been shut down long ago. That room is said to be haunted by an old maintenance man. Visitors began leaving sports memorabilia as a sign of respect because they heard he was a Steelers fan. A way of saying they meant no harm. But for me, that room carried no weight, no pressure, no presence. So I moved on. But just because something doesn't show itself in the moment doesn't mean there isn't something there. Something lurking quietly, waiting for the right amount of energy or the right moment to reveal itself. Such is the room as I visited next, the embalming room. The moment you entered, the air felt different, heavier, so thick it felt like you could cut it with a knife. This was the room where we started to experiment. We started with a simple recording device, asking questions, leaving space between them, hoping to hear a response. When we heard nothing with our own ears, we moved on to the next experiment, a simple mag light we had brought with us. We twisted the end just so it would barely make contact with the battery. It's said that when you do this, it makes it easier for the spirit to communicate, requiring less energy to complete the connection. We placed the flashlight on the old embalming table and began asking simple yes or no questions. Were you a patient here? And within moments, the flashlight turned on. That was my "did that just really happen" moment. So we asked it to turn the light off. Slowly, the beam began to flicker, and then it faded out completely, leaving us in darkness. Now, how are you supposed to feel in a situation like that? If you're listening to this, you've probably been into the paranormal for a while. You've seen the shows, listened to other podcasts. At some point, you become a little desensitized, or at least, you think you are. The light thing was definitely weird, but it was what I caught on the audio that gave me chills. It's a little hard to hear, but take a listen. I'll play it for you for a few times. To me, it sounds like the voice is saying, "Why won't you work with me?" A direct response to the flashlight struggling to turn on. That's what I hear, but I'll let you decide for yourself. Eventually, we moved on to other areas. One of them was a haunted stairwell, where if you sit quietly enough, people say you can hear footsteps moving above you. Sometimes even the sound of the upper door opening and closing again, as if someone was leaving. It was during that moment that I noticed something else, an orb, not on camera, but with my own eyes. It wasn't dust, it looked more like a pinkish bubble moving through the air. As it passed between myself and my partner, we heard the door open, then close, and then nothing. As quickly as it appeared, it was gone. We moved on to the upper level, where if you sit in silence in the hallways, you can hear a sharp, pinging sound travel up and down the entire corridor. It was a repeating sound, like something tapping against metal, moving fast, back and forth, repeatedly. It said that a patient took his own life in the shower. Standing nearby while the sound echoed through the hallway, it made it difficult to ignore. Another haunted room on that floor was Mary's room. It's been well documented as a paranormal hotspot, but for us, very little happened. The only thing we noticed was a set of hanging beads that seemed to move, just slightly, just enough to make you pause and wonder if it was something more. We didn't stay in Mary's room very long. Sometimes, the quiet is its own answer. So we continued on, further down the upper floor, to another room with a reputation of its own, Joe's room. And by that point in the night, after everything we had already experienced, we were paying closer attention, because that's how Hillviews seem to work. On the way to Joe's room, we passed a nurse's station, where people would leave packs of cigarettes for another patient who also ended up killing himself in the building. It was in this area where one of my members asked if I had threw something at him because it felt like something hit him in the back of the head. We searched around and found a small pebble on the ground. Did something throw it to try to get his attention? When we entered Joe's room, what happened here was anything but small. Apparently this entity is known for being noisy, and what happened here was a little wild enough that it sent chills up and down my partner's body. The full recording is over 5 minutes, but this is the portion that stood out the most. Take a listen. As you heard, he was leaning up against an old register, and when the woman asked him a question, it kicked, hard enough to send a jolt through the metal, and freak out my brother pretty badly. I'm not gonna lie, it threw me off. It wasn't something I expected. We didn't stay there much longer. After that, it was probably best that we moved on. And one of the last places we visited that night was the chapel. The chapel sits apart from the rest of the building. Not physically different, but emotionally. It wasn't run down like the rest of Hillview. It didn't carry the same heavy feeling. This wasn't a place where funerals were held, but it was still a place where goodbyes often began. The pews are simple, the altar modest. No grand design, just function. Even in faith, Hillview is practical. After hours of echoes, footsteps, and movement elsewhere in the building, the chapel felt like a pause. A place where whatever lingers isn't restless, but waiting. We tried one last EVP session. Nothing audible, no movement, no reaction, just emptiness. But I did catch something unexpected. Take a listen. Like last time, I'll play it a few times.
We have several recorders. Sometimes if you're strong enough, you can hear it. Excuse me. We have several recorders. Sometimes if you're strong enough, you can hear it. Excuse me.
Were you able to make out the words? They were quick, a little accented, but to me, it sounded like they were asking, "Are you scared of me?" Well, are you? Thanks for listening to Life, the Universe, and everything in between. If you've experienced something you can't explain, something that lingered, something that followed you home, or if you just want to say hi, I'd like to hear it. You can share your story at theinbetweenpod.com, and until next time, keep your eyes open for what lies in the in-between.